Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to week 3 of the Leadership Alliance Professional Development Workshop Series. My name is Dr. Taiese Bingham-Hickman, and I'm the Executive Director for the Leadership Alliance, and I will be moderating today's event. This event is a component of the Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Series. The Executive Office and its partners created this initiative to ensure continuity of skill building, networking, and exposure to graduate programs for undergraduate and graduate students from across the country. Paired with our Wednesday evening workshop series or Wednesday afternoon workshop series, we hope to expose you to a discussion of critical issues, allow you to network with one another and our wonderful doctoral scholars, as well as develop learning approaches and skills for navigating your research careers. Today, I am pleased to introduce doctoral scholar, Dr. Ashon Bradford. Ashon Bradford is the Assistant Dean of Diversity and Inclusion in the Tufts Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. He has a BA in Sociology from Grambling State University and an MS and Ph.D. from Cornell University, also in Sociology. As an undergraduate, he attended the Leadership Alliance Summer Research Early Identification Program at Cornell. Before coming to Tufts, Dean Bradford was an assistant professor of sociology at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois. As the assistant dean of diversity and inclusion, Dean Bradford provides leadership and vision for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice priorities, activities, and initiatives at the graduate school, including overseeing Tufts' pledge to become an anti-racist school. Working closely with students, faculty, alumni, and admissions and administrative staff, Dean Bradford develops and leads programs, events, and initiatives that increase graduate student diversity and enhance inclusion and equity. So thank you so much, Dr. Bradford, for joining us today. We have received a number of questions about your background, about your experience and your role. But before we get there, can you tell us a little bit about why or what inspired you to pursue a PhD degree?
First of all, thank you for having me and being a part of this opportunity. In many ways, I've been involved in Leadership Alliance since 2008. So it's sometimes weird to have been the student sitting on the other side and now to be in these secret rooms that people used to go off into and to plan these things. So in many ways, this is kind of a full circle moment for me. In terms of PhD, a lot of it is kind of related to this program, to going to a HBCU. I decided to pursue HBCU PhD because I had an advisor who particularly told me it was possible. Not something that I considered. An undergrad was a big accomplishment for my family. And so a lot of this was thinking about a PhD was getting summer pathway experience and kind of seeing people like you and people in the Leadership Alliance kind of having that identification that it was possible. So not only having the theory, but also seeing it was a big deal. And I think part of pathway programs and Leadership Alliance is kind of gave me the extra step to pursue it. Even though it's something I wanted, but to see other people have it led a long way into me actually wanting to get a PhD.
Thank you for sharing that. And we have another question related to your experience at an HBCU. So specifically coming from an HBCU or a minority serving institution, as we have a number of students on from minority serving institutions and Hispanic serving institutions, what do you think helps separate you from the applicants who also apply to Ivy League schools or predominantly white institutions?
So yeah, I would say, historical Black colleges were in my blood before they were even called HBCUs, when they were just called Black colleges. And so I am what I kind of consider a HBCU kid. I started attending Grambling State University Laboratory School when I was in kindergarten. And so 5th grade to probably 21, I had an HBCU environment. And so a lot of that I didn't realize to the other side was that part of that was affirmations. And so a lot of things that, even though, things that we learn about imposter syndromes and things like that, Part of that of being competitive and being proud of your history and things like that was just something I didn't know I was naturally getting just being on the HBCU campus. So a lot of things that I saw people come to get that experience was kind of normalized, and I kind of took it for granted early on. So HBCU queens, homecomings, classics, like that's been a part of me since I was like 4 or 5. So I think, the transition for me to a PWI space was was a big shift in terms of everything, not just academically, but food, music, everything was a culturally shift. But in many ways, this program had prepared me for it. Even though it's not something that you ever can really imagine until you get into it and you start looking for a barbershop, and all your life, you never thought you had to look for a barbershop. And so there are things that till you actually get on the ground and you have to figure it out. But in many ways, being in these programs and getting on campus during the summer and seeing it wasn't so much of a culture shock. And so my transition was kind of, I think, a little unique because, I had a lot of my culture affirmations growing up. And so it wasn't that I needed it from once I went to Cornell.
Yeah, I have a similar experience. I also went to an HBCU. So, I understand and can appreciate that care and attention that you're given at an HBCU and then transitioning to a large institution for graduate school, it can be challenging. So we have another question related to that. What advice would you give for either students at HBCUs or from smaller rural environments transitioning to a big research institution or an Ivy League institution?
Yeah, so I mean, currently I live in the Boston region, which is probably where sometimes schools are bigger than where I grew up. So like rural, I grew up in a town of less than 5,000 people. So even HBCU was a huge experience. And so kind of the magnitude of going to R1 and there's so much going on at one time. Part of it is you want to do everything because you were like, oh, I'm going to miss out on something. And so early on, part of it is just an overwhelming experience because there's a lab, there's a talk, there's a social activity like every day of the year, all the time, and trying to realize that also having the balance, but also know that you're in this intense program, you're in this intense, department, and what you originally came to was to get the degree. And so a lot of graduate school sometimes it's just balancing early on. And so for me, a lot of some things for me was going backwards, um, unlearning some things because part of my HBCU upbringing, and there's a lot of history, was that you have to work twice as hard. A lot of these things that we were taught, you have to be twice as better. And so the work ethic wasn't the problem. It was the balancing. And I think I see that in a lot of my students. There's this thing about HBCU and whether they're up to par and things. And sometimes it's overcoming imposter syndrome is that sometimes you're working more than your other colleagues and you have no idea. um, and so the imposter syndrome sometimes leads you to do unhealthy behaviors, even when you think you're working. And so part of graduate school for me was kind of just figuring out how to balance what I wanted to do work and also understanding socially. And that's not something that you learn in your first year, your second year, your third year. Some I still haven't figured out. But I think that was my biggest grasp because everything was working so hard to get to R1. And keeping up that pace is not always healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I guess a good segue would be specifically, um, how do you think your experience with the Leadership Alliance program at Cornell, how do you think that influenced your path to then completing your graduate education there? And how does your personal experience with graduate education at an elite school um, help you enhance diversity and inclusion programs in your current work? So I know that is probably, you could probably answer that question in the full hour that we have, but do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with the Leadership Alliance and then ultimately how you transitioned into your current role in the DEI space as a result?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my Leadership Alliance story is probably tied into, it's weaved into my academic career now. When I was preparing for this talk and looking back. And so I attended Leadership Alliance during the summer of 2008, which is a long time to look back at the calendar now. And so I was probably a junior at Grambling State University. Well, that's in Louisiana. And so coming to the Northeast, just even accepting it geographically was a big hurdle for me because I had no interest in going to upstate New York. Great school, people love Ithaca, but I had no interest in going to snowy upstate New York. As much as I've lived in the snow, it was not my interest. And so for me, it was kind of a battle because there was the greatness of Cornell, the school, but culturally, I wasn't sold on it yet. And so that was a big thing for me. And so during the summer, the good thing about the Leadership Alliance was that there were people from everywhere. As you would probably learn, a large cohort of people from the University of Puerto Rico. It's just something you experience when you go to Leadership Alliance. But it was the first opportunity where everyone wasn't doing what I was doing. So in undergrad, there's like your friends are the people you major with, you go to class with. But in Leadership Alliance, there's somebody studying mice. There's somebody studying, humans, somebody studying this. And so you just get a peek into what everybody else is doing. And so it gives you an early on experience of how academic knowledge works. And so for me, that was exciting because even though I don't want to play with mice, I got to see what other people do, not my interest. And so in terms of that, one of the real things it did, I see a question in the chat, is about imposter syndrome. I think one of the goals of Leadership Alliance is, it slowly pushes back at that. Because, I had never done statistics. When I told my mentor I wanted experience, he started working at SPSS. And it was one of those things where people ask you what you needed help for instead of guessing. And I think that went a long way in like saying that research doesn't have to be just figuring it out, that people would teach you the things you need to know if they feel like you got the talent. And I think that was a big part. And so in terms of this work, the work that I do now at Tufts comes out of my faculty route. And so a lot of things about graduate school is what I work on in my role is they've only known for a long way only how to train you to do one thing, is to be a faculty member. And so that's what I became. And I realized that I was still doing a lot of DEI work. And as many people who do this work, it becomes the unpaid DEI work. It's just the plight. I didn't believe it. My mentors told me, you become the Black faculty, and before you know it, your door is always open. People are always in your office. And I was just a first year professor. And just that quick, you go from graduate student to, mentor. That's how great the need is, that while these programs still exist, because you don't have much time before people look up to you. And so I think that is kind of my segue into, how I got into some of this work full time.
Thank you. I'm actually going to ask one of the questions that came into the Q&A because I think it's a good question. And I know a lot of students out there are probably wondering the same. So how did you manage getting a position at an Ivy League school, or how do you if you have a limited network? And do you think you can do it without the network, just based on your academic merits, or do you think that having a network is essential to moving up, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a weird, I have a weird phenomenon with, and people get on me with the Ivy League phenomenon. For me, I mean, Ivy League was great, but I'm a rural sociologist. And so the reason I end up at Cornell because they do rural agriculture, they do a rural work. And it's not that, I mean, Cornell is great, but if they were doing it at Penn State, if they were in the Ohio State, My work was more, discipline focused. And I think that that's one of the challenges. And in terms of network, um, there's being proactive networking, using different phenomena like LinkedIn, emailing people. But some of it just comes natural. Ironically, you don't realize it, but some of those people who are in the room with you, are great researchers in the world. And before you know it, in graduate school, that person who was a research coordinator, once you find out what they do on the research side, you've met them before people who, would write out to them and dream to meet these people. You've already met them. And you haven't seen them on the academic side, but their names are going to show up in the research side. And in many ways, you start building your network, just naturally, by names that you recognize and you didn't even know who they were or who they were in the field. And the fact that you didn't know goes a long way of who those people are, what they lead with. And so a lot of my network is just over time, just building good relationships where you were. And before you know it, you know, as Taiese would say, before you know it, you'll be on the list where people will be asking you to recommend them for big jobs. And search firms will be asking you, and you'll be like, how do I know? And that's how kind of small academia is as you get to the top. Very fast, your network just becomes people that you know every day.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When I was in graduate school, I went to NYU, and Jan Vilcek was on my thesis committee. And, he was just, to me, he was just a faculty member on my thesis committee. But if you know anything about NYU, if you go there, he has a building named after him now. It's the Vilcek Institute,
Mm-hmm.
was formerly the Sackler Institute. He patented Remicade. So he's kind of a big deal, but I had no idea. And just having him on my thesis committee, opens doors in and of itself. So again, you never know who you're going to run into, who you're going to meet. I would just say stay curious, ask questions. And especially, if you have colleagues or peers that are doing research outside of your area, like be curious, stay engaged. Again, you never know who that person is or will be, or they may need you, someday. So I think that's great advice. Can you talk a little bit about, how you made the leap from sociology, which was your academic discipline and background, to now working in the DEI space?
Yeah, it's an interesting transition, and I think it's unique for most people. So my background is sociology and equality, but my research is on the 1930s and the New Deal. And so sometimes there's just this natural assumption that, because you're a person of color and you study inequality, you study equality today. And so in many ways, like I know it as a person navigating these systems, but when I got into this role, like I had to be a scholar like everyone else. Like I wasn't trained to understand pathway programs and graduate programs and things like that. And so it was also a learning curve for me, because I hadn't looked at it, from a university side. So that's a bigger thing. And so for me, it was naturally curiosity, because I studied pathway to colleges. I'm curious about my own path. One of the things you often do when you get in these roles, you meet different people, and you all are at the same path, and you see how people got there different ways. Because you all end up at a cohort in graduate school, and they put you in the class, and then someone is from Turkey. So one of my better friends is from Turkey now, and they talk about their experiences, and you see very unique things about people who have never met. I have a friend who is Palestinian, and you see are people from different places, and that made me interested in, like, these are larger systems, because my lens was coming from the South, inequality, the way it's structured that way, but to see similar things in other places around the world. And I just happened to be in a development program that people were studying inequality for everywhere. And so that got me a bigger frame to like look at system wise instead of individual. And there are people who look at individual but I became interested in understanding the structure aspect. So moving into DEI, the work that I do, I don't do a lot of individual practitioner. There are people who that is a role who do student support, who do programming. A lot of my work is trying to like project and to understand like trends or where we're going. A lot of stuff that Leadership Alliance is trying to look into the future. Like how many graduate students do we need to keep this field going in the future? And so that became interesting to me because it involved demography, it involved literature and theory, but it wasn't just a particular focus. And to kind of wrap that up, I think you can have both passions. So I still have my research side because that's tied to my hometown, why I study rural people. But I also realized that this work also needs to be done. And I think that's also a thing that I had to learn, that my passion in research didn't have to be my career for research. And that's hard to figure out when you're trying to do in the grant world and you're trying to do tenure. Those are all things that you will learn about, that it's hard to navigate that when you're trying to figure out. One of the bigger questions is, how do you fund all this stuff? Which directs a lot of people's careers and kind of what they do.
Thank you for that. And kind of building on that, you mentioned some of the things that you're studying or you're looking at in terms of your research. How do you think these initiatives, DEI initiatives, are changing in the wake of the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action in higher education? And what advice would you give to applicants of color to make their application stand out, or to people from underrepresented backgrounds or from, diverse backgrounds, given the decision? I know that there are different ways that universities are asking for personal statements nowadays. And as someone who works in a graduate school office, like, what would your advice be to undergraduate students pursuing graduate school?
So I think one thing I would always encourage, that every school is different. Every school is kind of approaching how to respond, we say, to the scholar's decision in different ways. So we're really in flux right now, to really see how things are developing in real time. But for me personally, I started this current position at Tufts June 1st. And in academia, people have retreats at the beginning of the year. So we were sitting in a dean's retreat when the decision hit. And immediately that became the focus. And so over time, what we found out was that many of the things that we had already been doing were the things that other people were finding out. So we had went a long way between people being just their race. Early on, we had started looking at family background and cultural identity. Those are some of the things that they were arguing in the decision. And so we had gone a long way from many ways. I mean, this is what programs are like the Leadership Alliance. And so it became very interesting to see people now pivoting to things that programs like Leadership Alliance had already been doing. Like, you're more than just a box. It's what you bring to this. And so a lot of the ways our pivoting was kind of what I had already been trained out of these programs. Like, when I was writing a personal statement, those are the things they told me to write about. My mentor, my background, how it affected my research, what challenges I needed from those things. And that's kind of what we're asking students to do now. Because we can't, we have done things to, just protect people from biases. But in many ways, a lot of our grad programs were already asking for those things, because we had pivoted away from the GRE. And so a lot of our applications were getting at more things at the personal student and also at their educational and kind of what they are bringing to the program. So the caveat is that works very well in the undergrad model. I have 71 grad programs that all have 71 different ways they admit students. And so a lot of that, I would say, is reaching out to the program director, just asking them. They will take your conversation. They're always willing. Just say, I want to run some ideals by you. I want to think about how to write this application. They'll tell you what they can and cannot tell you. But what I learned early on is that it doesn't hurt to ask. Sometimes we don't want to guess because we don't want to bother people. But it goes a long way in getting as much clarity as possible. Because every grad program is going to be looking for something different. There may be a chance where they are doing this and that scholar is transitioning out, or the department is reframing about what they want to do, and you won't be able to read that from the website. But if you talk to the program director, they will tell you maybe we're not doing that anymore, and maybe you should apply for somewhere else. Because ultimately, what they don't want is a graduate student that they have funded, and we're trying to, master research together. That it works. You can get a degree, but it's not the best experience that we know now. We want students to have a good research experience, and sometimes that's early on figuring out if this is going to work for you. Because everyone knows that this process gets really long, it's really intense, and you want to have as much as a positive as you can doing the hard work. And so sometimes it's just figuring out, just talking to the program and asking, are you still doing this? Are you pivoting like AI? There's a lot of AI stuff that's coming out that's not on the website. But trust me, it's there. And so just asking the department, do you do these things? And if not, just ask them, do you know who else does it? And they'll be able to tell you, no, we don't do this, but someone else does it.
Yeah, and I think, as someone who works in a graduate school office, what would you say to students who don't feel like they have enough research experience and have that opportunity, like during the academic year on their campuses, which most HBCUs, there's not the infrastructure there to support doing research during the year. What would you say, makes those students stand out, or how can they stand out in terms of their application?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, and it's not always a fair process, just the world we live in. Some of it is early on figuring out, what could be your potential weaknesses. And a lot of that is, I had an old school advisor where I probably wrote my personal statement 20 times. Just change the paragraph when he had time. But part of that was early on, I had to learn critical feedback. Early on was like, and so part of that is sometimes going to someone and saying, taking a critical evaluation. What is it that you think I need to be successful in graduate school? And everyone has different weaknesses. Some people may be very strong in data analyticals and thinking through projects, but if you can't write up the results, that's also a challenge. And everybody has different strengths, and sometimes it's just understanding. Sometimes people struggle verbally sharing information. And sometimes that's part of academia, the posters, the presenting. And so early on, I think that was my HBCU experience that I realized some students don't get as I worked at different places. They were not very shy in telling you this is what you need to work on. And so I early on knew that because the way my sociology program was structured, it wasn't great in data analytics. And so I knew that graduate school, that stats is a market. So I knew early on that I needed to start working on stats. And still, it was still a challenge getting there. Because most people, now how I teach it, they've seen it in undergrad. I hadn't seen it as many times, but it wasn't me. And I realized there were other people who went to other universities that weren't HBCUs were struggling. But me understanding that, I didn't take it personal. I just took it as that's a challenge I need to work on. But if you don't know that, if you take it personal, I had a lot of students who fear stats. That's the first thing. They're like, I don't want to do demography. I don't want to do statistics. And it's a certain way to teach it. And it's a certain way you can teach it and scare people away from it. And so part of that for me is just constantly figuring out what I don't know and, willing to ask people for help.
And once you transitioned into graduate school, what would you say was the most challenging aspect? You talked a little bit about preparation already. You talked a little bit about the amount of support that you received um, at your HBCU, but once you kind of got there, what do you feel like was most challenging or that you learned about yourself that you weren't expecting?
I learned a lot about my field. I had learned sociology from an HBCU perspective. Um, and I think maybe my first year, my first theory class, we read one Black author, and that was Du Bois from early 1900s, and we didn't read another. And these were all great people that people had all stories and great things, and they had accomplished great things. But that was very foreign to me to fight for inclusion of Black authors in the canon. And I didn't realize that because all my training had been from the Black sociology perspective. So that was shocked to be sitting in a 3.5 hour seminar every day and figuring out and like looking at the syllabus and figuring out who, and they were great people, like introducing to Foucault and all different people. But it was a very European framework of understanding the world. And I didn't understand that because sociology is German and it originates from that. And the way that I had learned sociology was a little different. And so trying, it was almost building a whole new literature reference of people, and then also teaching people who these other Black scholars were. Like a person like E. Franklin Fraser wasn't a thing, in my program. And so that was one of my biggest challenge of like trying to figure out how did my education fit into what's coming here. And that's still a balance. And so that's still something as you go on to write papers and you do peer reviewers, you're still constantly battling against, who's in the canon, who's not. And so some of that, and then some of it was just the intensiveness of being in a 3.5 hour class with 6 people and there ain't no time off for a discussion. And you're just tired. You don't know why you're tired. And you got a TA. So that tiredness only lasts for so long because you got to grade these papers. So some of it was just like balancing now that it's an intense thing every day. And that translates into the workforce. And so that, I think that's a part of graduate school prepares you to process information kind of really fast and kind of move on and deal with it when you need to.
How did you navigate the cultural differences? Obviously, comparing your experience at Grambling to now you're at this large, elite research intensive institution in upstate New York, coming from Louisiana. You talked a little bit about it, but like, how did you navigate the cultural dynamics of graduate school? Because it's a long process, right? And so what advice would you give to students out there who are like, I'm from my small town of X and I don't see myself in that environment or that space? Um, how did you do it? I guess is the question.
Yeah, and this is just something I did. Maybe it was pre-social media. I mean, I would go to a website and I would look for BIPOC people. That's what I did when I went to Cornell. I mean, it's not a long list, but you find people and you look through CVs. It wasn't in my department, but right next door to me was a guy named Ralph Christie who went to Southern, and I went to Grambling. And so before you know it, we have Bayou Classic talk, and I'm up here in the middle. I'm upstate New York. And you go across the hall. Maybe they didn't go, but their sister went to North Carolina A&T. Their family. And so what you find is kind of like the Great Migration. No matter what it is, if there's a people of color in these spaces, their mother went there, their sister went there, they know about it. No matter where I go, people are from Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. There's some kind of Black connection in North Carolina. No matter where you go in these spaces, the conversation goes from academics to home, our music, our food. And so it's very rare because the Leadership Alliance is kind of a, I wouldn't say it's a thing that you see, but as you go out in the world, we see each other sometimes once a year at different things. But there are very unique similarities that just being from these experiences, that even after they leave these spaces, I don't know if that we long for it. We have Black graduate student groups. And so, there are people from Perry View there. So even though we have these like, larger internal, it becomes like an HBCU family. And then we adopt our other PUI people, we say, into the into the HBCU family. So it's really very small, and you before you know it, there are 20, 30 graduate students across the whole campus. And this is law, this is vet, this is everything. And you just do that to survive as a community. And before you know it, you've created a friend group of people who go out to do great things, who are lawyers and senators and things. And you're all just here, like surviving. And before you know it, people leave and go on their own paths. And that is one of the advice that I had to learn, that everybody's path is different. Some people want to be senators, some people want to be presidents. They are going to go on a different path. Some people don't want to be that. And you don't have to like get in a comparison game of where it is that you want to end up at.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's true of, any affinity group or, any group where you see yourself, to do your research before you start applying to graduate schools. Talk to current graduate students. If there's a particular lab that you want to work in, like you should contact postdocs that work in there or the graduate students and ask them about their experience. Don't get so caught up in the notoriety of the PI, if you will, because you may find out that they publish a lot of papers and they're amazing, but the climate in the lab is not something that you necessarily want to work in. And so I think that's important to just do your research, talk to people, about the not just the climate of the lab, but the climate of the university overall. Is it welcoming? Is it a place where, as Dr. Bradford mentioned, you can find groups or collegiality amongst individuals there? So I think that's important advice. What do you think are some new things that you learned specifically in the area of DEI, since you started your role? I mean, it's changing day by day at this point, but what do you think is different, or what have you learned about the work, that you weren't necessarily expecting when you took the role?
I would say one thing is, I mean, the work is ever changing. When I started this job, when I applied for the job, I was not expecting the SCOTUS decision, or Israel Hamas. Those are not things that we had game plans for or roadmaps, but they were a part of our academic year. And so what I often learn is that some of it's what's invigorating about the work, and sometimes it's very stressful, as that things change, with the current climate of the world. That's part of inclusion and diversity, because we see these students as part of the world and not just here. And I think that's some of the work that changed. And so a lot of my work, are things that, they are, whether it's food insecurity, where there are people, dealing with people not understanding their gender dynamics. A lot of things are things that, if you would ask me what DEI was 10 years ago, that's not what I would have said we would have been working on. But we ever change with the students. I think that's one of the things that universities is a good thing. They're not static, because there are different students who come every year. When I started as a faculty, maybe 5 years ago, pronouns were very brand new to me. And I'm a kid who grew up Southern Baptist in Louisiana, with all the dynamics that come with those stereotypes. But the kids that I work with, those are the things that, that they found as part of their growth and being inclusion in the world changing. And a lot of my work was training faculty to say that this is what make people feel comfortable in the classroom, and it's okay for us to make this small sacrifice, to learn people's pronouns. And so it's not often sometimes helping students, sometimes it's helping the institution, because the students are sometimes not sometimes, all the time ahead of us, because our systems, we got to change something, it has a bylaw and it has a committee. And so a lot of times is like trying to bridge the thing to say that we understand, but also trying to bridge because things in society can move fastly on social media. Things that Tufts don't always move fast. And to like explain to students that we do hear you, but there are different processes of how things move in the world and at Tufts. And so part of that is just, always, sometimes being a translator between both sides of saying that DI moves sometimes very light speed in the world. But we have these structures to also protect us from sometimes moving too fast in one way. And that's how we have to do DI to kind of check ourselves. So we can't just make these changes without having these structured policies.
Thank you for that. Um, I'm going to switch back to your experience with the Leadership Alliance. What do you think was the most impactful part of the program or part of your participation with the Leadership Alliance Summer Research Program? And what would you say to students? What advice would you give to them as far as maximizing that experience? Any words of wisdom you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, so the one good thing about Cornell, I was one of those students who loved the library. Like, I probably had more books, more things, went to more events when I was in the summer program outside of, and I won't say that works for everybody because I work with the summer program. I was a sociologist, so my research is a little different. If you have to be in lab, but part of it was, it also taught me that we could do research, but we can do fun things. So, being upstate New York, we went to the Baseball Hall of Fame. We went to Niagara Falls. We had social events. And so that was my first opportunity to see that you could have a balance and also be a strong researcher. But then also, the conference. So I've been to the conference many times at Hartford now, but I mean, it was moving around at different places. But there are people, so even in the job now, I do a community dialogue. One of the speakers I had was a person named Simon Howard that works in Miami. I met Simon at a Leadership Alliance conference maybe 10 years ago. And we follow each other on social media. And my introduction was, yeah, we were at somewhere at a conference and we were going out after the thing. Do you remember? And that's an academic connection that I just met because there are people at different levels, they're mentors. And that was just like hanging out, having a good time. And this guy is a star in the academic world. And the connection was from Leadership Alliance conference. And so I would say, like, I think things have changed. They have the WOVA out. But like when people at these conferences at high level say, email them, like contact them, reach out to me if you have any questions. Like they're actually serious, like about these things. And one of the things was shocking to me was like when people started responding. Like when a person was like, oh, and a person from Berkeley was like, oh, and I was like, a Berkeley professor, these things continue after the conference, is what I'm saying. So take advantage of like all the people in the program, all the emails you can collect, use the things in the app to connect to people. Because, in a year, that same person may be reviewing your application. It's a very small world. They may be on the graduate committee for the program in that department. And I think what helped me is I had a letter from the person in Leadership Alliance, and I just happened to apply to the same department. And I'm sure now that I know how this program worked, how this process worked on the back end, that pretty went a long way as probably supporting the HBCU kid to have a professor. So I would say work as hard as you can to get a letter, out of this process during the summer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that that's actually probably more valuable than the research itself is the power of the network. And I always kind of saw myself as someone who did not like to network. I was like, I don't know how to do it. Um, but I think if you're organic, if you're really interested in something or someone, it doesn't feel like it's networking. And that's what I had to like overcome in my head, in my brain, is like it's not forced. It's, me genuinely interested about something or someone or their work. And then if you look at it like that, it really becomes organic. and not like it's something that you have to kind of force yourself to do or check off the list. So I would agree with that. And I also volunteered office hours for anyone who wanted to sign up. And I only had one student sign up so far at Brown. So, I would echo that if someone offers their time to you, someone in a position that you see yourself in eventually, or you eventually want to go to that school or work in that lab, like take them up on that. They're genuinely trying to help you. And so you should be taking advantage of all of those opportunities inside and outside of your research. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah, and I think one thing I didn't add as once you get to graduate school. So in my role, we also run what we call professional development programs. So it just doesn't end in this experience. So I run a program called Graduate Leadership and Diversity and Leadership Experience, which is another program that graduate students who want to do DEI and don't get it in their research home, we also allow them to get that experience as if they want to transition to other things. So I think one of the things that I know at Tufts in our graduate school is we call this as kind of our giving back. So the motto of paying people to learn DEI stuff. So all of our programs that we have professional development, we pay students for the time that they do this work. And so that's our way of kind of signaling to the university and other people that it's an important thing as well as all the other professional development programs. And we also struggle to get people to sign up, which is another DEI challenge.
Yeah, and you're paying them. So
Yes.
who knew? Um, okay. We do have a couple of questions in the in the Q&A, and I want to get to them because we are running out of time. So the first question, um, how do you know what to do next? So specifically speaking, if you don't have any research or you don't have a specific um, accomplishment to put on your CV, what would you suggest in terms of taking initiative and marketability as far as graduate school is concerned?
So these are always interesting questions for me because I don't particularly read applications to select students. A lot of it's just overall in my experience. One thing when I'm advising students to work on personal statements and letters, it's kind of the concept to kind of think 3D. I try to tell faculty like we students, you know, reading the data and reading it what correlates and what comes out of the model is a great skill. But using the model to save someone's lives is what people are looking for in graduate school. How do you take the data and apply it to something new or what's happening? And so we're often looking for not that you have it, but that's a skill either you're looking for or you have some interest. And so it's not, just taking what is what. It's saying, well, this is going to do this, to do this, to do this. And then as you see in the back end, that's the same process I've seen that when we're hiring faculty. They don't want to just look for what they did in graduate school. They want to look for how they're taking that to do this, to this, to this. And so I'm always advising my students that, okay, what do we have now? But where is this going? Because are you going to make this your career or is this just one-off project? So kind of understanding there are different things. Is it just something you want to write about right now? Or is this your research portfolio? So understanding what is it, and I can say that I'm still figuring it out. I'm figuring it out, what is it that you really want to do? And then people can kind of give you the advice. And you'll have as you learn, you'll have different mentors for different things. You may have a mentor for affirmations who just tell you, I understand this process. I know it. It's not fair. And then you have mentors who will help you think through the process. Their structure. Like, I'm stuck. How do I see this to do this? And one of the things I learned is that the question is like, it's not an individual question. You have a part of it, but there are people who have done it. There are people who hire other people to do it. There are people who know what it takes to get there. And if you find those people who are generous with their time, they will share it. If they see that you if you want to do right by with this information. If they see that you have a desire to help other people, that's kind of been my career. People just saying, let me show you this, or let me add you to this meeting, or let me show you how to fundraise, which has nothing to do with DI sometimes, but people say, let me add you to development meetings. And part of that is just like staying natural curious, and just willing to learn, like at every step in life, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, in my previous role, when I was working in the private sector, I would always ask my boss, who was the VP of analytics at the time, if I could sit in on the meetings, even though I wasn't contributing, even though they didn't need me in there, just listening to how, the executive team works together, how they make decisions, has really given me some great tools and kind of guidelines for how I move now in my current role. So I would say, yeah. And then the other thing I would suggest for students who don't have as much research experience is, get involved with your community. If you're interested in public health, find a community organization, a clinic that you can volunteer in or that you can work in part-time. Um, it's not always necessarily about where you do your summer research. It's how committed are you to the work? That's what these schools are looking for, and what you'll be able to talk about in your personal statement, your personal experience, why you're passionate about something. If you're interested in the environment, like, can you volunteer with a community organization that is working on the coast, those types of things. So if don't feel so intimidated if you don't necessarily have that formal research experience, try to get involved in your community. So we're almost at time, Dr. Bradford. So I just want to ask if you have any parting words or suggestions, advice for the students that are out here listening today.
I mean, I would just say that, this is a great organization, to stay a part of. I don't know how they find you. Well, I know now why it's important. But they will continue to find you throughout your career, at different stages. I mean, I was a student, and then I think I was a graduate mentor, whatever the level is before doctoral scholar. And so I can remember when I was an undergrad, I think that was the year that they celebrated 200 doctoral scholars. And that, I remember that being a huge deal. So now to see 1,000 is like, to do the work that I do and to know how small these numbers are. Like, I'm always telling people, like, we don't have to create this. There are people who are already doing this stuff. Now that I do this work. And so I would say, one of the things that we often don't do, and because of I do this inclusion now, we don't give ourselves a lot of grace, for the challenges. A lot of your colleagues that will be in the same positions with you as you learn about all the resources. When you find out, you're writing the paper and your colleague's, dad is a professor, and you're trying to figure out how to get through this thing, and you can just be like, your dad was a professor? You didn't tell us? And so we don't give ourselves a lot of grace for the things that we overcome, to get in these programs, because graduate school, we don't do a good well with acknowledging those challenges once people get there. We kind of just put people in a cohort and say, just go. And we know there's those unseen things like hidden curriculum, imposter syndromes, things that don't show up in the data points that we know now are important. And so, I often tell people to think about the people who got you. I always tell people, my students here now, your first teachers were your family people before you got your degree, before they call you doctor. Those are the people who supported you first. Um, Indigenous knowledge is very important. It doesn't show up a lot in the academy. But there are things that you knew before you even learned it scientifically, just because of how your family knows. And what makes you kind of a star or a good scholar is the ability to bridge that. Because you can bridge that community work, and if you can bridge it academically, I think that's what makes you stand out in the application, and that's what makes you stand out in the field. And so oftentimes I say, use these things as an advantage. Everywhere I go, people talk about HBCUs. To me, it's very unique every time because that was such a normally. But everybody wants an HBCU connection. Everyone wants to work with BIPOC students. Everyone sees it as an asset now. As in, sometimes it was just a tolerance. And so I would say, take advantage of all these initiatives that are coming out because they're not guaranteed that they will be there. That's one thing we know from the civil rights movement, from Reconstruction. There are lulls in this country where things happen. And so take advantage of why they are here and use those resources to pass them on to other people, whether they're your community, whether it's people you see every day. Use these opportunities that have been given to you to try to share this information across society.
That's great advice. And with that, I think we are going to leave it there with that message of give back, right? When you have a seat at the table, make sure you extend your hand to those that are coming behind you. I think that's such great advice. So we're going to leave it there. Thank you, Dr. Bradford, so much for your time, for sharing your journey and your expertise with us today. I believe Dr. Indorf will be reaching out if you'd like to share your contact information so that students can stay in touch with you or ask additional questions, because I know we didn't get to all of the questions. But again, we want to thank you again for your time and thank you to all the students who attended. We will see you all on Wednesday. Thanks so much.